Thanks to everyone that's joined so far. We're going to give it a few minutes to let everyone get on, and then we'll start the webinar. But thanks again for joining. Thanks to everyone that's joined. Thanks again to everyone that's joined us so far. We're giving it a few minutes to let everyone get logged into the webinar, and then we'll get started. For everyone that's already joined, we're going to give the rest of the attendees a few minutes to get dialed in and comfortable, and then we'll get started with the webinar. Hello to everyone that's joined. We're going to give everyone one more minute to get logged in and comfortable, and then we'll get going with the webinar. We're excited to have you join us. Hello to everyone that's joined. We're excited to have you join us for our Data Governance Done Right webinar series. My name's Alex Anderson. I'm the Vice President of Business Development here at Numentica. As you all probably know, we're kicking off our 4-part Data Governance Done Right series. Today we'll be focusing on the ingredients for a successful data governance program. I'm excited to have you all join us. I do want to note, if you have any questions during the webinar, please go ahead and put those into the Q&A area. If for some reason, we can't get to your question, we can follow up with answers. So don't hesitate to add questions in there and we will follow up afterwards with any answers. So I'm gonna go ahead and get us started and teach you a little bit more about us for those that might be familiar with Numentica. We've been established in 2008 with offices in the US and India and 100 plus consultants worldwide. We are a certified Informatica implementation partner and have a strong specialty in data governance strategy and implementation consulting, including a dedicated team for managed service needs as well. Today, we're going to have some great speakers for you around data governance, as well as the rest of the series over the next 6 weeks. You'll be hearing from Sri and Lokesh today, their experience helping others with their data governance programs. Again, do want to stress, please put any questions you might have in the Q&A. We'll make sure to address as many as we can at the end of the webinar and follow up with those after. And I want to go ahead and kick it off. I'm excited to have Lokesh share with you all. So Lokesh, I'll give you the stage now.
Thank you, Alex, for the introduction, and good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everyone based on your local time. And today, as Alex mentioned, we will be talking about what it takes to be successful with your data governance program. And like any other program, when we start a new program or a new initiative, we try to keep the end in mind and then start. So that's the theme of this webinar today as well. And before we talk about ingredients, we first need to understand what constitutes of success. How do we define success for your data governance program? And then most of it is associated with the cost, right? So you might be trying to implement something that helps you to avoid cost or reduce cost, or maybe help you to generate new revenue streams. So essentially, we do some homework to define what success means for us, right? And then that leads us to the business drivers of your data governance program. So you might be implementing data governance program as part of your, say, your master data initiative. And then this is debatable, right? I mean, in the data governance community, this is a common topic of discussion. What should be done first? Master data or data governance, kind of the chicken and egg question. But for the sake of this webinar, we take that, okay, for your master data implementation, we can leverage data governance. Or you might be interested in compliance, right? Regulatory requirements. So things like CCPA, and with new policies coming across different states and continents, you as a company want to make sure that whatever data you collect on your customers, you are compliant with your policies. Or if you recently underwent a merger and acquisition, and as part of that, maybe you acquired additional legacy systems, and maybe you want to decommission that and reduce your storage costs, that could be another business driver for your data governance program. It could be around analytics. So if you're looking to generate new revenue streams and truly mine the hidden insights from all the data stores and data lakes that you have, and you want to enable your self-service, or rather your data analysts for self-service analytics, you might want to implement a data governance program for that. Or if your executives say that, okay, whatever data you are showing me in your reports, I don't trust it. So essentially, they are seeing two answers to the same problem, and then they might want to think, or you might want to think, that you are data driven on paper, but in reality, the decisions are gut driven. So there could be multiple business drivers for you. And before you embark on that critical journey of data governance, you should take a pause and really think about how does success looks like. Why in the first place do you want to implement a data governance program? And that gives us the very first ingredient, your business driver. In our implementation experience, we have seen that we engage with our customers, and then we don't have enough support from the business community, right? I mean, we don't have a clear agenda of what we are trying to implement, and the focus is on technology. That I have such and such products. Let's start building and see where it goes. That's starting on a wrong foot. So the number one thing to keep in mind is having a clearly defined business driver. Now, let me share some quick stats with you. In a recent survey, 63% of the leaders believed that they lose or they are losing competitive edge due to the data issues. In yet another survey, 81% of the leaders said that they fear they could be non compliant to regulatory requirements. Now, those are incredibly high numbers. Can you believe that? Well, if you do, please don't, because these numbers are just made up. Now, the idea behind is that though it is good to learn from others' mistakes, and it's good to an extent to see what others are doing, but data governance is really a unique concept. You, as an organization, have your own unique challenges, right? And then it will take a unique solution which is catered to meet your needs. So all of these numbers that come out in the reports, it's good to know, but then the idea is to really to invent your wheel, right? So you might have often heard people talking about don't reinvent the wheel and learn from the knowledge that exists. It might be true for other programs. In our experience, we have seen the most successful customers are those who design their own solutions, who invent their own wheel. And as it goes with any new initiative, planning is important, right? So, in the context of data governance, what are some of those aspects or artifacts that we can plan even before we start anything? Number one is your data governance charter. Now, this charter is the onus of somebody who is driving this data governance program. So you could be in charge of implementing a DG program, you could be a director, or you could be just leading that initiative, right? Irrespective of your designation. So it's on you to come up with that initial draft of the charter. And it said that we humans are not very good at creating something new, but we really excel in giving feedback on what's already out there, right? So the idea is you're doing your homework and you're coming up with that initial draft of the charter, which you can then take to senior leadership for their review and for their buy in. So, what are some of the things that go in a charter? Why do you need data governance in the first place, right? So the business drivers that we talked about. Why do you want to implement it in terms of goals? What are those goals that you can envision being addressed by virtue of a DG program? And then break it down into deliverables and outcomes. What do you expect to come out of this program? And it's really important that when we talk about the outcomes, we always have to keep the overall organization strategic initiative in mind, right? So things like that, okay, I want to implement business glossary solution so that all of my technical data, metadata is labeled. Well, that is good, but how does it help the overall business goal? That understanding is really important, and that should go in the data governance charter as a map. And then we can anticipate that, okay, if you are targeting, say, a CDO or a CIO to be your champion data governance sponsor, then you might put his or her name on the charter initially, and then as you conduct those meetings with multiple stakeholders, that document will evolve. So things like who has oversight of the overall program, right? Who will take the funding decisions? So if you are looking to buy a technology solution and then you want to keep those dollars flowing in, you have to prove success. And then who do you prove the success to? Who will then eventually sign off additional funding that you might need for maybe additional personnel or additional technology subscription. So governance charter is the number one artifact that we have seen our successful customers start with. Then another important aspect is the operating model. Businesses are different, right? In scale. So somebody who has been in business for hundreds or 200 of years, somebody who's fairly new, maybe 5, 10 years in the business, and that will drive your choice of the operating model. So spend some time thinking about what model suits you best. Centralized model where there is a single body overseeing the entire program, or decentralized where you break into fragments, maybe based on geography or business areas, or federated or a hybrid model, right? Define a steering committee. How would an ideal steering committee look like? Who define that, okay, what data is critical, right? What are the data domains or classifications of data that we should be going after? Things like that. And then those decisions trickle down your data governance office, where you define the reporting hierarchy. So you might have a steward, you might want to establish a stewardship office because that plays a crucial role. So all of the high level initiatives or the decisions that the steering committee takes goes down to data governance office, and then based on your responsibility of a certain subject area, you become the business steward for that. And it is your responsibility to make sure that we have enough controls to maybe ensure quality data, or if you are talking about data privacy, make sure we have enough controls to protect that sensitive information. An important consideration here is IT representation in the DG office. We should have that adequately because, and we all know this, right? Being in the DG practice, we know that this program has to be business driven, but then IT representation is equally important because they own that technology landscape, right? Your entire data ecosystem, and they are the ones who really understand how the things in your data landscape have been implemented. They can give you valuable inputs on the issues, right? So like the decisions flow top down, the data issues flow bottom up. So having that IT representation is important. And it's also important when you are working with multiple vendors to choose the right technology solution for you, right? You might see beautiful things during your demo, and you might come to believe that yes, this solution will help me implement my governance program, but having the right IT folks in that purchase cycle will help them to ask the right questions in terms of how easy it is to adopt the solution, right? So you're really setting a solid foundation. And then based on business driver, if you're privacy driven, we have seen that, okay, the thing that high senior leadership wants to do is they want to be CCPA compliant or GDPR compliant. And that's the statement that comes down to the DG office. And then DG office has to sit and then implement that and make sure that the overall org is CCPA compliant. Now, to ensure that end objective is met, there are certain steps that we need to do. First of all, define risk, right? What is my risk surface? Where are my data centers located? What kind of data am I collecting? And then translate those regulatory requirements to achievable deliverables. So taking CCPA as an example, where the users or the consumers have right to be forgotten, for per se, or a right to delete. Um, like that is a legal language, right? But in terms of an implementation, we really have to understand and maybe work closely with the legal team to translate that to deliverables, because there are exceptions, right? Only companies whose revenue is up to a certain dollar amount, they are under the purview of such policies. So it's really exhaustive exercise, and planning is super important. Then you might also want to see, I mean, it's not just specific to one policy. If you are in a regulated industry, you might want to come up with holistic list of policies to make sure that you are compliant overall, right? So again, defining that risk surface. And what we have seen in most successful implementations or what distinguishes a good program from a great program is the plan how to mitigate the risk post discovery. So all of the solutions that you have implemented, you have done a fantastic job of identifying your sensitive data, and you're done with the diagnosis, right? You have labeled everything and you know what data is sensitive. But what do you do after that, right? I mean, you have the information ready, but how do you mitigate that risk? So solutions like Informatica data privacy management, these tools give you the capability. So for example, you want to mask data in your non-production environments, you can use plugins with the DPM and do that. And then some of the things would be quantitative and would require efforts outside of the solution, right? And data governance is about technology as well as people, right? People, process, and technology, the golden triangle. All right, the next concept is about defining trust. So in governance space, we all talk about data quality, the single source of truth, and then executives not trusting the data. So we struggle to prove that data in the report is actually correct, and then come up with all sorts of mapping specification documents and whatnot. Um, but when we talk about governance and really be successful so that your senior leaders trust your data, we have to define that trust, right? It's beyond just the quality scores. So how to calculate those trust scores? So things like if you select a data domain, say customer data, right? And then you are dealing with, say, product department or marketing department and sales department. You can ask questions like, does this data segment impact a single subject area or multiple subject areas? Or does it have this impact directly or indirectly? Now, if it obviously, if it has a direct impact, it has to get more score, right? On a scale of 1 to 5, maybe it gets a score of 5. And if it is just impacting one business area, it might get a score of, say, 2.5, right? And then we come up with that aggregated score. So that becomes your actual trust rating. And something which is really critical, you define that expected trust rating, and then you model the delta, you model your roadmap that gives you that, okay, this is where you are, this is where you need to be, and then what are the efforts that you need to take. So we are really breaking it down into achievable things that we can showcase back to the leadership team. Think about the different control dimensions. Almost 80 to 90% of the times on the projects that we work, we see that, okay, we have a fantastic product, and then which gives you all sort of capabilities to measure that quality ratings and the trust, but we don't know what rules to put in place, right? So what we recommend is, even before you start exploring the products out in the market, have this plan in place. Decide, okay, what are your critical elements, the trust ratings, what are the different quality controls that you want to put in place, and more importantly, where to put these controls, right? So again, I mean, and you might have heard of this in many thought leaders say this all the time, that try to put the controls as close to the point of inception. The closer you are, or the closer you implement the control at the source, the better chances you have of not corrupting the data downstream. Okay, so this exercise is important. And while we do this, we have to track alignment again. Whatever we have defined in our data governance charter, we need to make sure the operating model, the risk exercise, the trust exercise, that all ties back to the overall objectives and the expected outcomes defined in the data governance charter. As you finish this planning phase, you would have achieved something of great value. You have identified people from your leadership team who will have the oversight of the program, who will take funding decisions. You have the stewardship office established, so you have sufficient interest from your business stewards, and you also have representation from IT office. Now, these are the things that really matter to success, right? So the next ingredient is governance program, business driven, we all know, and supported by IT. That is how we can truly embark on a journey where we can expect success. And let me share an example here, right? When we say data governance should be business driven, at times people tend to take it too seriously, that, okay, governance, business will lead it. So I remember I was working with a banking customer, and then when we got involved, all of the folks that we were interacting with were business folks. Now that is great because they were able to clearly articulate and communicate their expectations, but then who is going to do that implementation work, right? I mean, they did not account for IT personnel, because these things tend to get a little complex when we talk about the implementation. um, so we cannot expect senior bankers to log into the tools and do your metadata scanning or do that curation, right? I mean, they can provide guidance, but we have to have IT support. So the project that I work on, they faced this challenge. And on the other extreme, I worked on a project where it was totally IT driven, right? I mean, so the folks that I was interacting with, they were like, okay, I want to see end-to-end lineage. I want to see my stored procedure lineage with my underlying tables and views. I want to track every single attribute, because that is what they were interested in, right? Their expectation was, if there is a new developer joining the team, he should be able to log into such and such product, and then track that lineage, understand the transformation logic, understand the view definition, in a single tool. Now, they failed to understand how does it tie back to the business initiatives. So these are the two extremes, right? Totally business driven versus totally IT driven. That's not a good thing, and we have to strike that balance. Driven by business and supported by IT is where we truly see the value. All right. Now that we have talked about two ingredients for success, let's talk about one ingredient that is a recipe for failure: the sunk cost fallacy. And you might have heard of this, but for those who have not, um, I have highlighted the text in green and red, which will give you that idea. And I will share an example that will make it crystal clear. So at times, what we do is we tend to invest maybe money or time in a certain thing for an extended period of time. And then motion detected at the front door. Sorry, guys. So I'm sorry about the background noise. Okay. So we tend to invest our cost and time in certain thing, only to realize that it's not giving us any value. But instead of stopping and thinking about it, we tend to invest more cost and more time, right? So the time or money that we have already invested, that is our sunk cost. Take a look at this example. This gentleman in fancy shades, he says, I know the last five scratch off tickets didn't win, which means this next one must be a winner. So his investment on the five tickets is a sunk cost, but instead of stopping, he is willing to invest more. In your uh, governance program, if you have not thought about your business driver, or if you have not done enough planning, you might want to stop and think about it, right? You might have invested 6 7 months and not seen any value. It's okay to stop rather than investing another 3 or 4 months. Just stop there and revisit the entire thing with a new lens. Okay, analysis paralysis, I mean, that is self-explanatory. And the idea is, when we talk about planning, we tend to go overboard with it, right? We tend to spend too much time in planning. We want to make sure everything is perfect, and then we get so much involved in planning phase that we just keep up keep planning, right? I mean, it never materializes into anything substantial, and we just keep planning. So we want to make sure that we avoid analysis paralysis and focus on just enough consensus and just enough governance. So when we talk about having that business sponsorship is important, there will be politics, because there will be representation from multiple business areas and different subject areas, and everybody will have their own vested interest in what they want to see first in the data governance program. And then you, as the driver for your program, it's your responsibility to uh, initiate meetings, to initiate, have conversations with them, prioritize the tasks, what is really important, and then begin with that. And you don't need to get everybody excited that yes, this is what we need to do. Just have them say yes, okay, let's see how it goes, and that is good enough for us to get started. So that's the concept for just enough consensus. And the other one is just enough governance. These are actual numbers. Earlier I gave fake numbers, but these are actual numbers. In a report by Gartner, less than 2% of the entire data is critical for business operations, right? So, and again, if it is IT driven, the example I was giving, they were trying to govern every single attribute or the data element. That's not a good approach. We just need enough governance to make sure your critical data is governed. And again, I mean, we have to be flexible with that definition of critical. What is critical today might not be critical tomorrow, and what is not critical today might be critical tomorrow, right? So be flexible around it and let the program evolve with time. All right. A journey of 1,000 miles starts with, that's correct, a single step. So let me give you an example of a typical business, which it's kind of a template or a framework that will suit most of the businesses, right? So there is a company which will offer a product or service offerings or goods, right? Service offerings like professional services. And then there will be customer partners or employees where there will be a transaction, right? So there is a customer who places an order or buys anything, maybe the service or the product from the offering company, and it generates the order for us. And the outcome of this order is maybe the work effort, that is the SOW, or maybe the logistics, the shipment details of transporting that product to the end user consumer. And then as a result of that, there will be invoice, and then you have to take care of the payments, which goes to the finance department and the accounting department, and all the way there will be other supporting departments. To put this slide itself, it took me around 15-20 minutes. So imagine you're trying to govern all of your data across all of your business area, across all of your subject areas, right? It's a Herculean task, and it's definitely a recipe for failure. We don't want to do that. We want to take baby steps. We want to start small, right? So again, prioritize what is really important, and uh, that consensus can be reached out of your planning phase when you are involving everybody in your data governance as you are writing your data governance charter. Okay. All right. So aggregate of marginal gains. Before I talk about this, I want to share my recent experience. So I experienced a phenomenon, and you might have heard of this phenomenon, the frequency illusion, or in fancier terms, if I can say, it's the Barder-Meinhof phenomenon. For those who have not read about this phenomenon, this says that if you see something for the first time, or if you observe something really close that you like, you tend to see that same thing over and over again. So a couple of weeks back, I was watching this movie, The Pursuit of Happiness, Will Smith, right? Fantastic movie. And then he plays the role of Chris Gardner. And then I was browsing, and then I came across the name Chris Gardner, where he was talking about that 1% principle. So I read about it, and I thought that would be a good example to convey this point on today's webinar. So basically, he says adding 1% effort for one full year gives you a result which is 37 times more than your current state, right? It's so powerful, right? I mean, we are just talking about 1%. So if we achieve marginal gains on a daily basis or a weekly or a monthly basis, and when we aggregate that at the end of your first iteration, the end product is really powerful. And that introduces the next ingredient for your success: iterative governance of critical data, right? So you have identified what business area, you have identified what subject areas, what data domains, and then you have identified your critical elements. Start small. Start with that. Communicate success back to the leadership team based on the objectives you have in your charter, and then scale up from there. Move on to your next iteration. This is the approach that we have seen successful customers take. All right. So the next recipe for failure ingredient is, let us do a project, right? I mean, this is a common thing. And I would like to think that you would agree that data governance is not a project, because a project, the key characteristic of a project is that it has an end state and an end date. But governance is different, right? I mean, it doesn't have an end state or date, right? It is a journey that continuously evolves because your business operation needs change, your data changes, right? So those needs will evolve. But a data governance program can be broken down into multiple projects. So things like you might do a small project on classifying your technical metadata, or labeling the business relevance or the business glossaries, right? Do a mini project on defining those quality controls and enabling that trust. Similarly, crowdsourcing is super important, right? Like, what others say about data is more important than what data says about itself. So crowdsourcing what the peers in your community are saying about that data, and whether it is the right data set for your analytics, right? Define those policies and processes. It could be a project in itself. Define those business glossaries. Um, and business glossaries, it's such a, I mean, it's such a complex thing. I mean, to ensure to be successful with your business glossary project, I mean, we can spend a separate hour dedicated to business glossaries, right? So it could be a project in itself. The change management, once you have implemented something initially, how do you manage change? So if the definitions are changing, or if the quality of or something that is critical is not critical tomorrow, how do you manage that change, right? For your data redundancy or deduplication, identifying similar data objects, that could be a project. The lineage, right? So if an auditor asks you this you are storing this sensitive data, how do you control that? So using that lineage diagram, you can use that as a document, as a reference document, that this sensitive data is stored in such and such systems, this is how the data is flowing, and this is the access control that we have implemented. And then data accountability, right? Who owns the data from a business perspective? So the business stewards, the data owner versus the technical stewards. So all of these concepts are projects in itself, right? So overall, the governance program can be broken down into multiple projects. It is not a project in itself. All right. um, so another recipe for failure, in the month of maybe January or February, you might always get an email from the compliance team that your security training is due by such and such date. And then you get an email from your manager to complete that training, and then share the results back. And then typically that security training will be a 40-50 minute video followed by maybe 10, 15, 20 questions, and then there is a passing score attached to it. um, uh, and let's be real, right? I mean, not everybody goes through that entire 50-minute training. We just hit the next button, reach the questionnaire, and try to answer the questions and be done with it. And some of the questions there will be multiple choice questions, and the last option typically is all of the above. And then I personally feel that, okay, the moment I see all of the above, I tend to just check that okay, this is the right answer, and then maybe it is, or maybe it is not. But the psychology that plays is, if I am being presented with certain options, I am inclined to take all of those options, right? So that's another thing that we uh, tend to do that mistake, right? Want versus need. So again, coming back to the earlier example, when the data governance project I was doing, and it was IT driven, they wanted to see lineage for every single attribute. And then it was hard to convince them. I really tried to explain that, okay, just focus on what you need. But they were like, no, I mean, if the product is offering me lineage for every column, I want to see that. I said, okay, fine, let's do that. And then they spent about a month to do end-to-end lineage for like 10 or 15 stored procedures, and they were really excited and happy about it. And then the big day came to demo it to their VP, and and I mean, the technical team, they started that, okay, we have this stored procedure, there are 20 columns, we can see the transformation logic of each. And the VP was like, okay, I mean, I don't have time, I'm not interested to see all this, tell me, how does it help me, right? So the idea is, be aligned with what your leadership wants to see, because eventually they are making the decisions, they have the oversight, and they are taking those funding decisions to make your life easy. So focus on what is needed for meeting the initiatives or the strategic objectives, rather than what the product is offering you. All right. In South Asia, or Indian subcontinent, where I am from, and many other parts of the world where I have not been to, but there is this unique concept. So on city roads, if you go to maybe Mumbai one day, and as you drive on city roads, you will see that as you stop on a signal, there will be a bookseller having those 20-25 books in his hand, and he'll come knocking on your window and ask you if you want to buy a book. And then if you're a reader, you might just quickly skim through of what all books he has, and then you might buy it or not buy it. And the duration is really short, right? 45-50 seconds for the red light. So this is the context, right? Because I mean, people in US, UK might not be exposed to this idea, but it exists. So there's a story. An author, he phoned his friend and he said, "Hey, I want you to come over to my place. I released this book last month, and it's a huge success. I'm getting very positive feedback and comments about it. And why don't you come over for drinks to celebrate this?" And his friend said, "Okay, all right." And then he goes to the author's place, and then as they are drinking, like they're enjoying a glass of scotch, author is all excited, right? I mean, he's like, okay, I mean, I've heard so much positive things about comments, I'm really excited, that this is a success, this book is a success. And his friend says, "I apologize for being the bearer of bad news, but I don't think your book is a success. And the author was surprised. He was like, why? And that's when he says, when your book makes into that pile of 20 books to that road bookseller, that is when you should think that your book is really a success, because that guy is carrying the weight of those 20, 25 books in scorching heat, going car by car, knocking on windows. He doesn't have the luxury of time to go back to his stall and get the book uh, the guy in the car who's there for 40 seconds wants, right? He will only carry the true best sellers which he thinks has the potential to be sold. And that is what we are I want to convey in this slide, the next ingredient of success, that you might think you have done a tremendous job of implementing something, you have done all the right things using the technology, and you think it's a success. But to really ensure that it is success, you should measure it through the lens of adoption, how the frontline data consumers are interacting with what you have implemented. Are they seeing their day-to-day activities getting simplified? And on the other hand, does it serve the interest of the senior leadership? So adoption is important. Okay, now I want you to walk down the memory lane, maybe 10, 15 years, when we did not have those blind spot detectors. And it was driver's due diligence that to change the lane, you have to look over your shoulders to check nobody's in your blind spot. Um, and then most of the drivers did, but at times, maybe you fail to do it, and that's not good, right? With the advent of blind spot detectors, something good happened. Technology was able to drive the human behavior. So the moment I put on my blinkers to change the lane, and if there is something in my blind spot, I get that alert beep sound, or maybe my side mirrors, they light up, right? It shows me some sort of signal, and I correct my behavior. So technology is really driving my behavior, and that is something we want to be replicated in our data governance program as well. Because eventually, the frontline consumers are the ones who are dealing with your data. You might have great policies written sitting somewhere on a shared drive, and then you might have a fantastic data warehouse which is accurate and of good quality, but we are missing that crowdsourcing. And if it is sensitive data, we are missing the policy alignment, that okay, this data set is under the purview of what policy. And we expect the frontline consumers to do the due diligence, to go to that shared drive, read the policy, come back to the data, and then interact accordingly. A good implementation would make sure that whatever enrichment to that data is, be it the operational metadata, be it the business metadata, or whatever kind of enrichment, the crowdsourcing, it is present then and there at the point of access, right? That is when they will truly correct their behavior. And data governance is all about driving that cultural change, how we interact with data. So picking up the right technology is important for that, and having that implementation mindset is important as well, to embed governance at the point of access. And that is the next ingredient for success. All right. So before I talk about the last ingredient, right? Whoever identifies the name, great. But whoever has not watched Big Bang Theory, let me take 10 seconds to introduce this character. He is a physicist who tends to be a perfectionist and who wants things to happen in a certain way, right? I mean, he lives in an apartment and he has a couch and he has a particular spot on his couch, and he doesn't like anybody else to sit on that spot because it's his spot. And then he has a neighbor, Penny, who is an aspiring model, and then who is really cheerful, and then not very keen on academics. And Sheldon, being the physicist, he's an academist, right? In one of the episodes, we see the concept of positive reinforcement. So he gives Penny a chocolate every time she does something what Sheldon considers correct behavior. And then he sees that pattern, that okay, she was about to sit on his spot, and then she was like, oops, I almost sat on your spot. And then he says, very good, here's your chocolate. And then she gets a call and she's like, hey, hello, how are you doing? And she tells her friend on the phone that, okay, let me take this call from the hall. And then he says, very good, take this chocolate. So we are talking about the positive reinforcement here. Now, data governance program is something similar, right? I mean, we have to create excitement with the stakeholders. You have to create excitement with the people who are on the front line doing that implementation, so that they are committed to the program overall. So we need to appreciate that, right? I mean, that appreciation could be in terms of recognition, giving them awards, or maybe taking out the team for lunch after you have implemented something successfully in your first iteration, or maybe give them incentives, right? The accolades or some points. And that gives us or introduces us to the final ingredient for success is celebrate success itself. Once you have done it, celebrate it so that it reinforces positive energy and excitement for the next iteration that you're about to do. Let's quickly summarize what we discussed so far. Number one, aligned to your business driver. Spend some time and think about what you want to do. MDM, data quality, data trust, data privacy, analytics, whatever you want to do, have a clear focus on that. Number two, driven by success and supported by IT. Spend time doing that planning even before you start anything. Spend time on your data governance charter, on your data operating model, defining the steering and the stewardship council. Spend time so that you ensure that you have representation from business as well as from IT, and then everybody has an interest in what you're trying to do. Take an iterative approach. So Chris Gardner, right? 1%, the 1% principle. Start with the critical elements, and then do it over and over again. And at the end, you will see tremendous success with the multiplication factor. Measure success through adoption. So the bookseller example. Make sure you success how well your implementation has been adopted. Embed governance at point of access. The blind spot analogy. And finally, the celebration part. Remember Mr. Sheldon Cooper. That brings us to the end of episode 1. And before we start taking the questions, I quickly want to remind you of the episode 2, which we will have next week, same time. And we hope to see you on the next webinar as well. Thank you. And Shri, over to you if there are any questions from the attendees.
All right, thanks, Lokesh. We did see some Q&A coming through. We did answer those questions as it came through. But I'm going to club some of the questions together. There are some questions which means the same from our perspective. If it is different, then definitely we can address that separately. There are two questions which I believe it is same. It says, how do I get a business sponsorship or an executive? How do I get an executive sponsorship? There are quite a few factors to address this. One thing which we have seen is how do we monetize these efforts and present that to a leadership team? When we say monetizing the effort from a data monetization perspective, how we are able to create this data or create an insight to the data so that we can help to create an external revenue system as well. When I talk about revenue system, not only external, we also need to think about how we can address the internal revenue system, internal consumption as well. If the data is just going to be used within that organization. Also, if the program is supposed to increase the value of an organization's data asset, then we are just talking about monetizing the data rather than defining policies, procedures, and standards across. So that's one aspect to when we present this to the leadership team, how the data plays a critical role, not only for the external revenue, generating the external revenue system, but also internally how it is being used for internal consumption. That becomes very significant. Some of the other things which I think about is how others in the same spectrum of business are affected, or in the industry got affected due to a lack of or the absence of a data governance program. Some of the stories which we can share as well. Lokesh, do you think any other aspect here which we can, from the business sponsorship level?
Yeah, I think you covered it all, Shri. The only thing I would like to maybe can add here is getting that creativity part out of our brains, right? Get a little creative. So things like fear of missing out, right? I mean, we can present a story that if we don't do this, these are the potential downfalls, right? And just be creative in how you communicate your idea to the sponsorship. That goes a long way.
Wonderful, thank you. Then there are some questions. One, I believe it means the same. How do I select the correct vendor for my data governance program? And there is one other very similar, how to choose a vendor for my needs. Okay, so again, there are quite a few factors here. It all goes back to your requirements, right? As we evaluate the program, you have a requirement traceability matrix. That's all my requirements, which I've captured during the evaluation process. If the vendor or the product or the solution offered by the vendor is able to satisfy my requirements, where does all the functionality which I'm looking for is available out of the box. If it is not available, how much customization is required. If the vendor is able to support that aspect of customization, either by the vendor or by a partner, or is it going to be something internal which you need to deal with? So those are something which you can really measure. Now, other thing which we have seen across to select a good vendor is, what is the support level from the vendor? How is their professional services team? And are they continuously engaged with this process? Are they continuously engaged with our success? One of the main aspects is, if the vendor is continuously engaged with our success, are they bringing us some ideas? Are they able to bring how other customers have succeeded in that program? So that's very key when we look for a correct vendor as well. Lokesh, any thoughts from your side on this?
Yeah, maybe a couple of points that maybe we can add, Shri, is we kind of talked about it, measuring things from the lens of adoption. So how easy it is to adopt that solution. And coming back to the point where in the planning phase, we should have that adequate representation from IT, because during the sales demos, we can see that, okay, I mean, this is a fantastic thing, and this is what exactly I want to replicate. But when it comes to implementation, we find that it was not so easy, right? So having that right technical expert in that purchase cycle really helps that he or she asks the right question, and then you can make an informed decision about it.
Wonderful. All right. That takes me to, there are one, this is interesting, is data security privacy part of data governance program. This keeps coming up. Data security privacy. Okay, this can be viewed in two different ways. It all depends on where your data governance program, the stage, right? Is it is matured, or it's evolving, or it's just started? We've seen both sides. One where there is no active data governance program, but there is at least some mention about data privacy and security, or at least data security team. So it all depends. Like if you have a well-established data governance program, data security or privacy can be part of the data governance program, because a lot of those activities we do during the data governance program, even some aspects, if I want to take some examples, you would have done extensive cataloging, you would have done extensive lineage, you have done some quality measures, and created all your business glossary assets across, right? And these can play a significant part into your data privacy. When I talk about privacy, it can be, mostly it can be, we always try to address external, but the internal ones, how effectively we can use all we cataloged and try to create those classification policy, address the security violations. How do we look at the vulnerability and try to remediate that? So the data privacy can be part of the data governance program if the data governance program is at some matured state. Lokesh, your thoughts here?
Yeah, Shri, again, I will just say, invent your own wheel, right? I mean, others might be doing things differently. This is your unique challenge. This is your unique position. Think what is best for you. You might have a program maybe dedicated for data security and privacy already. Let it be separate. If you think it can be clubbed with your governance, don't be afraid to do it, right? Just invent your own wheel and just create your own recipe for success.
Wonderful, thank you. All right, there is, I'm going through the Q&A. Oh, okay, adoption. Okay, there are two questions on adoption. One talks about adopting, how do business users adopt the technology that we have implemented. And the other adoption I'm seeing is, I think it means the same. How can I measure adoption? All right, I'll take a stab at this. How do I really measure the adoption of my solution? All right, this goes back to one of the earlier slides which Lokesh presented at the initial part of this webinar. check your objectives in your data governance charter, right? Those key objectives, the key business drivers, goals of your data governance program, even the expected outcomes of that, oversight of the program, and funding decisions. That can really help to measure the adoption of the solution. To be very, very specific to an example which we looked at, say, what if I, at least to some extent, I have a data governance program, I've brought in a vendor, we are able to implement a solution. How do I see success there? How do I see my end users have adopted to that solution? I'll just go with one example, and Lokesh, you can add to this as well. We were in a scenario where we did bring in the best tools available in the market. We were able to successfully implement a data governance program, and the business users adopt to it. So I'll take one example of a specific business user who's in process of creating new reports, be it a compliance report. Is the business user able to go and find the data attributes that is required for that particular report? The earlier process before a successful program or a successful tool implementation was it is a process of approaching the right IT folks, possibly to some extent even to work with some DBAs to get that information. But having a successful solution implemented, the business user should be able to go and look for the data by themselves. They should be able to go and look at what has been provided, the data sets where the data quality measures have been put. Can I trust these data sets, which is already available in the tool set? So it's sort of they can provision their own data from the solution what has been provided, rather than going through an approach where they have to go through either dependent on IT or into an extent with the DBAs as well to get the data. So if the solution what we offer, whether we are able to catalog the data, where we are able to run data quality rules, and where we are able to give them the trust score, whether they have two similar data sets, one data set is much better than that the second data set, but the data is very similar. Does it follow all the data quality scores of conformance, completeness, and timeliness, and all those things? Then you're giving that ability for that business user to go and provision their own data or look for those attributes which can go onto their reports. Lokesh, anything to add here?
I couldn't have explained it any better, Shreya. If I have to summarize what you just explained, I would maybe just say that communication is important. So communicating to those business users, to the frontline consumers, and ask their feedback. Do they think this implementation had made their life easier? So the example she talked about, the earlier state versus current state, do they see any benefits? And if they do, congratulations. I mean, you are on that journey of adoption.
Wonderful. So there's also a question about the data stewardship. How does the Stewardship Council play a role in the success of the program? Lokesh, do you want to take this?
Yes. So, I mean, talking about the Stewardship Council, right? I mean, so first, what we have seen is typically people break it down into business stewards and technical stewards. Now, business stewards define the ideal state, and technical stewards make sure that where the solution that has been implemented, they know where to go and implement that particular thing, right? So the Stewardship Council is really the heart of this engine, right? I mean, they know what needs to be implemented, and the technical counterparts, they know where to be implemented. So, I mean, it plays a very crucial role. Also, they understand the business really well, and they partner with the IT team. So they are able to do the translation, the business requirement translation into something that IT can understand. And the challenges maybe that IT team is facing to maybe translate that and communicate it back to the business and then plan accordingly. So they play a pivotal role in this overall governance program that we have seen.
Wonderful. Thanks, Lokesh. I think I got that time is up for this, right? So we do have a few more questions. What I would definitely do is, I think I did address some of them on the Q&A. I do see some more. Let's take the question, and we have to reach back to the folks. Alex, once we answer the question, if we can communicate back to the attendees, that would be great.
Yes, definitely. We'll make sure to follow up on those questions for anyone who we didn't get an answer. We appreciate you sending those in, and we look forward to providing the answer to you.
All right, great.
And again, thank you all for joining, and we hope you can join us next week, April 1st, the same time, for episode number 2, how to get started with your data governance program, where we'll be building off everything you learned from Lokesh today. So again, thank you for your time and hope you can join us next week.
Thank you, everyone.